Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The Brooklyn Defender Services provides legal representation to people who are too poor to afford an attorney. And one of its important areas is family defense. The advocates there represent low-income parents in child welfare cases in the Brooklyn Family Court. And if you've ever been in a family court, you know how important that is. Lauren Shapiro is its founder and director and my guest today. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. So tell me how your unit is set up. It's not just attorneys.
Right. So the family defense practice is part of an overall office called the Brooklyn Defender Services. We also have criminal attorneys, immigration attorneys, and education attorneys. And I run the family defense part of the practice, which is attorneys, social workers, and parent advocates.
And its purpose is really to keep a family unified.
Absolutely.
You think that family unity is a constitutional right?
Well, family integrity is a constitutional right. I didn't say that, but
I know, that's what I read someplace.
The Supreme Court has been saying that for years. There's a very strong fundamental right to family integrity, for families to stay together and for families to have autonomy of decision making. So that's a very powerful part of our constitutional legacy. And at the family defense practice, what we try to do is make sure that all families matter, that low-income parents also have a constitutional right to family integrity.
And the basic object then is to keep a child or children out of foster care, or to shorten the length of stay in foster care.
Yes, so our mission is to keep children out of foster care, and we do that in a lot of ways. Obviously, there are some children who need to be in foster care. When a case comes into our office, we get assigned by the family court the day the case is filed.
You are automatically assigned.
Well, we don't get assigned to every case. There's also panel attorneys that get assigned to some cases. But
it's the ATB.
Yes, and we pick up the majority of the cases, and we also conflict off some cases because we're part of a big organization. But the first day that we get the case, if ACS is asking that the children be removed, or it's possible that they've already removed the children before they even come to court, we have to make decisions with our client about whether or not we're going to fight that. And very often we do, and we have hearings. Sometimes the first day that a case comes to court, we have a hearing, and we might ultimately prevail on the hearing and get the children returned to their parent or be able to stay with their parent. And that work is really the heart of what we do.
Now, some children, if ACS, that's the Agency for Children's Services, if they come to a home, and they usually come because it's been reported someplace by someone.
Correct.
Someplace that something's wrong in that household.
Well, essentially the way that it works is that there are mandated reporters who are obligated to report if they believe that a child is being abused or neglected. So schools, I believe, are probably the biggest source of reports.
Doctors, emergency rooms.
Yes, hospitals as well. So they report to the State Central Registry, which is in Albany, and then that office refers the case to the local Child Protective Service Agency, which in New York is ACS, and then they investigate. And in some of the cases, they indicate the case. Some of the cases are unfounded. Indicated means that there's some evidence that there's abuse or neglect. And then of those cases, there's a percentage where there's a court case that's filed.
And if they file a court case, that means they've already taken the child out of the home?
Not necessarily. ACS has a policy of filing cases even where they're not asking for the children to be placed in foster care. And this is a concept that actually one of the prior commissioners, Commissioner Mattingly, came up with because he believed that by bringing more cases to court to get court-mandated services, that would decrease the likelihood that children would ultimately be removed. And even though, we don't believe in court and state intervention except when necessary, I do believe that filing court-ordered supervision cases does result in children, not as many children ending up in foster care, and I think that's one of the reasons that we have less children in foster care.
We used to have something in the 40,000.
That's right.
And now you have about 11?
About 11,000 in New York City.
Incredible. Yeah. And Are there children that you know that are almost permanently in foster care? They don't come. Who represents them? ACS?
Well, the children are represented by their own attorneys, and for the most part, that's the Legal Aid Society Juvenile Rights Practice. So they have their own attorneys. Sometimes panel attorneys represent the children if there's a conflict, but that's primarily who represents them.
And these are poor people.
Yes, in order to be eligible for our services, you have to be indigent, and our clients tend to be really the poorest of the poor in New York City. They're mostly people of color. The vast majority of our clients are African American or Latina. We also have a lot of immigrant clients who don't speak English very well.
And does this reflect also the number of children in foster care?
Yes.
Predominantly of color?
Absolutely. That's the vast majority of children that are in care, and I think that's obviously a really important thing for policymakers to be looking at.
Right. The support services, you provide them, but also when the court mandates support services, is it mandating you to provide them, or do you
we did once have a judge mandate us to provide services, but that was only one time, and really that's not appropriate. The city's obligation whenever a child enters foster care is to make efforts to try to return the children, and that's actually from federal law. So they also have to make, it's called reasonable efforts, they also have to make efforts to try to keep children out of foster care in the first place. So one of the things when we get a case that we try to argue is that ACS didn't make all the reasonable efforts that they should have to keep the children out of care. But a big part of our practice is negotiating with ACS over what's called a service plan. So, as I mentioned, we have a lot of social workers on staff, and the social workers on staff go to agency case conferences on a daily basis, and they travel all over the city for sometimes 2-hour conferences, and it sometimes takes them 2 hours to get there. Okay. And they negotiate around services and visiting, and that's a really important part of our practice, is this interdisciplinary practice, because the cases can be very complicated.
They usually are. They're not. You just solve one thing, and it's like peeling something with layers that we always think of.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the reasons I've done this work so long is that every case is different. Every case is unique, and some are not as complicated as others, but a lot, the social workers work on the cases that are complicated, seriously mentally ill, substance abuse, domestic violence. And in those cases, getting into the right services is extremely important. We like to say, we do whatever we can to get our clients the help that they need.
What percentage of them do you keep out of foster care?
What percentage of our cases don't enter foster care? It's over 50% of our clients' children are not in foster care. And most of those kids who are in care, a majority of those, we do end up getting returned. But there's quite a few that also end up being adopted by someone else, or there's the kinship guardianship program where our clients' rights don't have to be terminated.
And a relative takes care of them? Is that what happens?
Exactly.
And they can go directly into that kinship relationship without going into...
Yes, they can go into kinship foster care from the start of a case, and that's another important aspect of our work, which is to try to help our clients find relatives and work with relatives to get them to take children. Obviously, it's a lot less traumatic for children if they're going to be placed in foster care to be placed with family. The kinship guardianship program is slightly different. That's a program that's has been available for the last few years, where instead of terminating a parent's rights, if children are in foster care with relatives, you can have this program where the relatives get a subsidy, but the rights don't have to be terminated.
And they're paid almost as foster parents.
It's not quite as much, but I think it's comparable.
What percentage are single parent families? A lot?
I can't tell you the exact number, but a lot, yes. But,
every case may be different, but almost all cases are very sad, right?
Yes, in most of our cases, there are two parents who are interested and involved. And while we represent mostly mothers, we also represent 30 or 40% of our clients are men.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And do you get involved in custody?
Yes, we're assigned to any custody cases. So some of our cases do end up in battles between mothers and fathers. And my attorneys do not like those cases, but
why?
We do them.
Why?
I think most of my attorneys...
only one parent?
I think... Yes, well, we can only represent one parent, but most of the staff attorneys who do this work came because they believe strongly in representing individuals against the state, and the issues are very different when it's two parents, and it's also usually at the end of a long and complicated case.
Right. Is the state the enemy, the city or the state?
I wouldn't say that they are the enemy. They are definitely our adversaries on cases, and sometimes very often, in fact, usually, we can reach settlements, sometimes through a lot of negotiation and a lot of hard work. But, so there are adversaries in court. I have a good relationship with the administration of ACS. They've been very open to listening to our concerns. This administration as well as the past couple of administrations. So I wouldn't say they're our enemy. I would say that the child welfare system is our enemy. It's a very punitive system that really I don't think ends up helping children or families. I think it tends to end up hurting them. It's so traumatic for children to be removed, and I don't think we found a great way for foster care to provide the help that they need when they're taken away from their families. It really causes a huge amount of trauma to the family, and we feel very strongly that children should only be removed in very, very small circumstances.
But the state or the city, whatever, the state, I think is always afraid something bad will happen and they'll be responsible. So I imagine they overcompensate for that fear. So they're there, right?
Well, I have to say, I think, when there's a newspaper article and a child dies and ACS is held responsible, after that there's some backlash usually. And yes, I think a lot of the decisions that are made based on a fear of something going wrong. And, I can understand where they're coming from, because I think it's important when you do this work to always, see the other side and where they're coming from. But I think what's counterbalanced against that is that there's a lot of attorneys fighting very strongly for them to follow the law. That's our job. And so while they may make these decisions, we're in court fighting every day, requesting emergency hearings or challenging dispositional or doing contested permanency hearings to try to get kids out of care. And
is there notice given that a child is going to be put into foster care?
Well, so there's not advance notice, and as I said, in some cases the city will remove children before they even come to court, and that's one of the things that we've been fighting with them about. And actually through our advocacy, the rate of children who are removed before coming to court has gone from 80% to most recently 40%. But we want to get that lower because, again, it's very traumatic for children to be taken away, and especially because we win so many of our hearings and children end up going back home, often because we're able to provide alternative resources or a safety plan, or the court can enter orders that make it safe for children to stay home. This seems to be a problem not just of parents but of society. People are indigent, means what? They have no job, or they're on welfare, they have to work, they have no childcare, they have no place to live. It goes back to the very basics, doesn't it? All of that. Sometimes I think that when you look at child welfare cases, for the most part, you do see a failure of the safety net for poor people. We have a lot of cases, for example, where a parent is taking care of a child who's extremely ill but not getting the support services that they need. Housing is a huge issue. We have a lot of clients who end up in the system because they live in poor housing conditions, or we have a lot of clients that live in the shelter system and end up getting cases called against them because...
Is that by the shelter? Is the shelter a mandatory reporter?
Yes, the shelter is a mandated reporter, and a lot of cases get called in. It's not a great living situation. It doesn't bring out the best in people who are also dealing with mental illness. It may exacerbate some of those issues while they're in the shelter. So it's all of those things, and many of them are related to poverty.
Are they children of parents that were in similar circumstances?
A lot of them, yes.
Yeah.
Again, every case is different.
Yeah.
As I mentioned, we have a lot of cases, for example, where the allegation is excessive corporal punishment, and that client may not be poor. That may be the way that they were raised.
I was going to say, they don't know that that's not the right thing to do.
That's right.
That was that football player, right? I was convinced that he was brought up that way.
Yes, a lot of our clients come in saying, well, that's how I was treated.
Yeah.
And I do think it's the responsibility of the city to be educating people about what their expectations are.
Right. What's the average age? Is there an average age?
For children in foster
For
care?
families who are in jeopardy of losing their children, the parents?
Well, we have quite a few clients who are young, some under 21, but I don't think there's an average age, no. I mean, our clients are primarily in their late 20s or 30s.
So something with parenting skills and things like that might also help? Is that part of your supportive services?
Well, again,
what do you do?
We don't provide supportive services. So what our
you've referred,
we refer people out. We do, our social workers, as I mentioned, the primary thing that they do is going to agency case conferences so that our clients have an advocate with them. And I just want to mention this is actually a big change in the system from when I first started. In fact, I think it was in the early 90s that we sued ACS because in violation of the law, they were never allowing parents to attend these service plan review conferences. And now it's routine that they're held, that parents are invited, and now we're participating in those conferences. So
that is a very good change, right?
It is. It's one of the definite progress that we've made.
And domestic violence, is that a major? ACS used to remove children in homes where there was domestic violence between the parents.
Correct.
Do they still do that?
So after Nicholson, which was the lawsuit that challenged that, for some years they did still file cases against domestic violence victims. But I have to say at this point it's very rare. A lot of our clients are the people who are accused of the domestic violence, and there's quite a few cases that involve that. Some of the cases are one-time domestic violence. They're not, one of the things I would say is that I used to represent victims of domestic violence, and the way that we defined domestic violence and that I think the domestic violence community defines it is power and control issues, that one person is asserting power and control, and it could be through physical violence or through trying to influence the person, but ACS doesn't use that definition. And so there could be a case where there was like a one-time incidence of violence. And, in general...
Why don't they use that definition, do you know?
I'm not sure.
Too general?
I think it's just day-to-day, not used in that way. So if there's a report filed, let's say by the police, they might file a case and intervene in the family's lives. And sometimes they ask for orders of protection, even when the usually mother says that she doesn't want one.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that the ACS workers are now trained, aren't they, to identify domestic violence? Or it's supposed to be.
I think they're supposed to be. It's unclear.
Right. All right. What happens if the client has also been charged criminally?
So we have the benefit of usually having an attorney who's also from our office. We do have a large number of cases where there's a criminal and family overlap, and there's a large, many different types of cases that could be. Domestic violence is one of them. And we work very closely with the criminal attorneys. It does affect a person's case.
It's terrible. And there's such a variation, isn't there, in the cases?
Yes. So
I once worked on a case where a woman was charged because her baby starved and died from malnutrition because she didn't know how to nurse the baby. And it was in criminal court. It was, anyway.
Yes, we have cases like that. And again, just going back to the work that our social workers do, we are very much about trying to empower our clients, help them to change their lives. Our work is about really working with people in a positive way, developing a trusting relationship with them, and helping overcome the barriers that they have to keeping their families together. And we have incredible success with that.
Tell us about some somebody.
Some success?
Yeah. No.
Well,
just
okay,
tell us what happens. Give an example.
I mean, I could tell you about somebody that works in my office who was a client, and we represented her for a very long time. And she had, I'd say, a typical case where she left her kids home alone, and somehow the police were called, even though nothing really happened. And I think she ended up testing positive for marijuana, and her kids were put in foster care. And we have clients all the time who tell the caseworker or that they smoke marijuana or agree to get tested, and then that becomes an allegation of neglect in the case. Even though all around the country there's a movement towards legalizing marijuana, in New York City that can be an allegation in a case.
And that allegation will result in taking the children out of the home?
It can, absolutely.
That's just up to the judgment? Who decides that?
Well, that's up to the
family
ACS to decide. Well, initially it's up to ACS to decide whether they're going to ask for removal. Yeah. Ultimately, it's the judge's decision, and once the case comes to court, then you're assigned an attorney and you have a right to a hearing to challenge that decision. Usually kids are not removed solely on the basis of marijuana. What we see more often is that becomes a required service, and people might have trouble stopping completely, and that could end up delaying getting children out of care where there's other issues. Or I've even seen clients' rights be terminated solely for that reason, that they are continuing to smoke pot.
And if somebody is depressed, very depressed, and say she's staying in bed all day, and she's not in school, the kids aren't in school, what happens?
Well, again, our social workers, those are cases that our social workers would work on. ACS might file an educational neglect case, and probably in that case they would allow the children to stay home. They don't usually ask for removal on educational neglect cases, but our job then becomes to make sure that we figure out what the issues are. If someone's not getting their kids out to school, it could be many things that are going on. And so our social work team is going to work with that person to figure it out and try to help them get the services that they need.
And that means referral to mental health places? I mean, is
yes.
mental illness a reason to take a child away?
Oh, yes.
And how is that defined?
Many cases. Well, basically the definition under the law is, it's not enough just to have a mental illness. It has to be a mental illness that actually causes harm to the children. So the parent has to either, not be in treatment or not following their treatment regimen. And as a result of that, there's actual harm to the children. So it's not appropriate to remove children if all their needs are being met, which they often are.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we try to show.
There's a lawsuit now against ACS because why? The process is too complicated or too slow?
Well, that's what the lawsuit alleges, that children are not receiving permanency quickly enough, and that the lengths in foster care...
And by permanency, are they talking about adoption or return to the home?
Well, that's one of the issues that we have with the lawsuits. Mm-hmm. But what the lawsuit talks about... I was going to say is
that you're not a great supporter of the lawsuit.
No, and I can explain why. But one of the basic premises of the lawsuit is that children in New York stay in foster care longer than around the country. And I think that statistic is very misleading, partly because of the children who are in our foster care system. First of all, since we've had institutional providers like Brooklyn Defender Services and Bronx Defenders and Center for Family Representation, parents have had very, very aggressive attorneys who've been able to keep kids out of care. So the kids that are going into care are really the hardest cases. I don't think you can compare the length of stay of foster care in New York with the rest of the country, where they don't have the same type of representation or due process. In many states throughout the country, parents don't even get an attorney in these cases, which is, shocking coming from New York. Yeah. In New York, we have a statutory right, parents have a statutory right to an attorney, but in other parts of the country, they don't. So yes, we're fighting for our clients till the bitter end. And, yes, terminations take longer when you have an attorney that's really litigating the case and really trying to, get the kids back home even at that stage. So I think it's very misleading.
And are you finding the agency more responsive?
More responsive since...
To the needs of, I don't know.
Well, I still think there's a lot of problems. I don't think that I wouldn't have chosen to file a lawsuit personally as a way to get ACS to do reform. I think there's a lot of agreement that if you look around the country at these class action lawsuits against child welfare agencies, it's not clear that they really result in positive outcomes. I think that the lawsuit was filed without actually trying to work with ACS to come up with a reform plan. I think that's the option that I would have chosen. I think it's sad to see the city scrambling around working on a lawsuit when the real work that they should be doing is reforming the system. I think it's going to be a long time before there's no more reform needed, and I think we all agree on that.
But there's been so much progress since I was in an administration or around. I mean,
there really has. Yeah. And, I've been around that long too.
No, not quite.
Not quite as long, but I've been doing this work for over 20 years, and it's really remarkable how different it is. And as I mentioned, I think having institutional providers who have the wraparound services that I was talking about, the real support of supervisors and social workers and an administrative team, makes a huge difference in the system.
The progress that you and colleagues have, the progress that's been made has really been due to you and colleagues like you. It's an incredible service.
It's amazing that there's so many people who are doing this work now. There are people like Professor Marty Guggenheim from NYU who started before me, and he's one of my mentors. And I think there's also been a lot of support from the city to change the way they do business, which has really helped. We've had some really good commissioners the last few years, and that's made a big difference.
Well, it's totally admirable, and I certainly admire you. And I guess it's God's work in a way, right? Even if you don't believe in God.
I wouldn't put it that way.
Every once in a while, I don't know.
Sometimes it feels that way when we win cases. It feels like it has to be divine intervention.
It must be an incredible
it's hard
feeling
to
win a case, right? I mean,
it is, especially getting
to see a family come together,
getting children home.
And do people decide this early on in a career, or do they come to it later?
I think it's an exciting time to do this work, and it's really a whole new legal practice area that didn't exist when I was in law school.
Well, I'm glad it exists, and thank you very much, Lauren Shapiro.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.